Mentioned earlier that September is almost over. Isn't that amazing? Somebody told me it gets old. The older you get, the faster it gets, and I'm starting to believe it. I think all of us probably say the same thing. It just seems like time continues to go very quickly, and that's true for our world today, isn't it? It just seems like it happens. We are in Galatians this morning, and beginning in chapter 1, we have looked 2 weeks at this whole area of Paul and his letter, and this is really his declaration of Christian liberty. And the man is being attacked mercilessly. In the area of Galatia, we identified as that southern Galatian region. There are those churches that he founded in Acts chapters 13 and 14 were at in that area. And he is being attacked by these individuals, and he is now going to defend himself, something that is difficult to do, but Paul is going to defend himself. And, I read this statement. It is refreshing. Paul is a refreshing person who dared to do the will of God. Isn't that refreshing? It's refreshing to have somebody that you know doing the will of God. And Paul was somebody who did the will of God no matter what. And, that is a refreshing thing to do. And it refreshes individuals whenever they think about who God is and what God has done. And Paul is not afraid to tell everybody and to write it down for us that that's what he's all about, is doing what God would have him to do. One of the primary objectives of these Judaizers, and that's the group that are attacking him, they came and they followed him around. If you want to read Acts, you'll see him following him every place he goes. They just follow him around from one place to the next. This group following him around, their idea was to stir up confusion. They wanted to discredit Paul. They wanted to attack him in any way they could. Their whole purpose was to prove that his message was not truly from Jesus Christ. And one of the best ways, and boy, we're seeing this today, one of the best ways to discredit the message is to discredit the messenger, right? This is politics 101 in our region today. You attack the person who gives the message. And that is basically what they are doing with Paul. They're attacking Paul. And when they do this, they think, well, this way we can just get rid of everything he says. They accuse him of a lot of things. They accuse him of building himself up, elevating himself, being a prideful person, putting aside all the Jewish ideas and now coming up with this new idea. And what gave him the right to speak for God? He didn't get this from anybody else. He wasn't even saved when Jesus Christ was. He wasn't even one of his followers. He wasn't in the band as far as the 12. He wasn't even involved in that. He wasn't an apostle. He wasn't around whenever they did those things. And even he was persecuting the church. He was the number one person who was dragging Christians in before the Sanhedrin and arresting them. And how in the world now can he have this message? There never appears in the Bible to be any doubt about who the 12 were. I thought about that this week. I never find any kind of argument about should Peter really be in this group or not, or Bartholomew. You probably don't even know the names. I don't probably know all of them either. Or Titus Justus. I never find them an argument going on. Which ones should be apostles, which should not be apostles. Even in Acts chapter 1, whenever Judas has left the band, they take these two men and they make Matthias the one, and there's no question about this. He's put into the position. And so there's never any doubting about who the 12 are. And of course, Paul is outside that band. He's outside that group. And he was not an apostle. He was an enemy. He wasn't with them. And his apostleship was attacked. And it was attacked mercilessly. And we are seeing the results of that. We don't hear the attack in Galatians. We hear the defense. We hear Paul telling about what's going on, how this happened to him. And it's important for us to understand that Paul was truly the apostle that he says he is, and that he is the one who God has selected to give this message to the individuals. And so we're going to see some of his defense this day. And this is Paul's calling. You might, as we read this, you might think to yourself, why are we going on this travel journal? You know, we're going from this place to that place to another place. Well, I trust this morning that when you leave, you'll have this all pieced together in your mind and understand exactly what Paul is doing. And really his main point comes out of the first couple verses. Everything else is proving this main premise that he is going to give to us. And he asks these two questions in verse 10. Father, as we spend our moments looking at your word, encourage us to be those individuals that understand that this message that was given is from you. And it's something that you revealed to us and how important that is. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Three things I want you to notice with me this morning. First of all, his message. Secondly, his achievements and his mission that he went on. But Paul was one who had a message that was given to him, and he is talking about that message in these first three verses, basically, verses 10 through verse 12. We have this idea of the message that Paul is given by his individuals, by Jesus Christ. And he talks about in verse 10, he wants them to understand what motivated him. You know, what caused him to do this? And verse 10 would be his motivation. It says in verse 10, he asks two questions. For do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? Now, right here is really a mouthful. Something for us to think about and to meditate on for a few minutes. Paul says, I'm not in the business of pleasing individuals, of pleasing men. Paul was not a people pleaser. Boy, this is unheard of today, isn't it? Today we look at polls and decide by the polls what's going to happen. Paul was not a poll taker. Paul was not one who went out and tried to find out what was going on and then come back and do it that way. You know, let's think about it. How in the world, who impresses our minds? Do you ever think about this from time to time? You know, who is it that impresses the way I think? Who is it that sets the tone for my thinking processes? Who do I really trust? Have you ever sort of just sat back for a few minutes, you think to yourself, is that person credible? Can I really trust that person? Can I really believe in what they say? Because today we know we're living in a world where, boy, there's so much propaganda. I guess that's a good word for it. That's flying around. How do we trust somebody? And you know, I was listening to something by R.C. Sproul the other day, and he was saying that he had a group of upperclassmen in this that he was teaching. I think it was 30 of them. And he was talking about evolution. And so he asked them a question. He says, do you believe in evolution? And of course, he said 27 out of the 30 raised their hand. These are people going to Yale and Harvard and all these places. And so he said, I asked this question. I says, now give me 5 reasons why you believe in evolution. You know, it's R.C. Sproul. You ever heard R.C. Sproul? I can't remember all the words. I mean, it's pretty complicated, okay? But anyway, the first point he made there, this kid raised his hand, and he said he raised his hand and made this observation, and Sproul talked about it. And he said the second person, he said it was a big law. He said, you know, I just want 5 reasons. He sort of defeated the first one. He said, I want 5 reasons to believe that, you know, life came from a single cell amoeba, I think he said, or something of this nature. The second kid raised their hand after a while, and he says, well, he said, I guess I believe in it because I was taught this in high school and college. And Sproul said, well, I'm not asking you where you learn it. I'm asking you why you believe what you believe. And he says, I'm going to leave that aside. He says, let me just think about that for a second. He says, you believe what a trusted person teaches you. And they all thought about it. Says, yes, a parent, or a teacher, professor. You get your information from somebody that you basically trust. And he said, well, yes. He says, but even though there's no foundation for it, you believe simply because you trust that person. How do you discern who you believe? Think about it. Most of the time, it's because somebody you trust tells you that, right? And we find that in this area, we should be understanding that it's important where we get our information from. He said, I asked for a third reason why they believed in evolution. He says, there was no more reasons. They couldn't even come up with 5. And these are people going to Yale and Harvard. One of them was a doctor and everything else. And I thought about this myself. Well, who do we trust? Who do you trust? When you hear something, how do you know it's real? How many words do you hear a day? Wouldn't it be fun to count them? I mean, how many opinions do you hear a day? I mean, they're all over the place, constant. People espousing this, or somebody espousing that. Somebody taking a poll. And isn't this really the whole basis of our legal system? What do we have standing in front of the courthouse usually? We have this lady who has this scales, right? And what does she have on her eyes? A blindfold. What's that represent? She does not look at any circumstance. Justice is based on the case. It's not on any kind of polls. It's not on any kind of personalities. Justice is supposed to be impartial. Isn't that right? That's what we're built on. That's what our American system is built on, the impartiality of our judicial system. I heard somebody say, I think sometimes she peaks a little bit. I do too. They're not supposed to be influenced by polls. Justices aren't. But sometimes they seem to peak a little bit. Who do we trust? Paul is addressing this in the first verse. He says, I want you to understand that the message that I am giving, it's not some human origin. It's not a group of journalists sitting in some office someplace making this stuff up. This is not the combined intelligence of Socrates and Plato and all the great Greek philosophers that came before. This is not the latest educational system that back in the 70s took the walls of the school down and in the 80s put the walls of the school back up. You probably don't remember those days, do you? The school they built in Clinchco, they had no walls. And the next time they built a school, they put walls back because the philosophy had changed. This is not where we get our information from as believers. Not those who are going to change instantly or whenever the newest system comes around. Paul says, I'm not listening to what man says. He did not set my message.